When it comes to survival games, we've been around the world and then some, conquering forts on islands, diving to the depths of the ocean, and even riding around on dinosaurs, waging all-out war. But what if I told you there was a brand new survival game, changing things up, looking to make their mark on 2022? Hey there friends, it's Kodiak here, welcome to Legacy Gaming. Today, we're bringing you our ultimate preview for Stunlock Studios' brand new multiplayer survival game, V Rising. Now, let's be honest, if you haven't heard of V Rising, that's okay. The game hasn't been getting much mainstream attention, but give it time and I have no doubt the team behind the game, Stunlock Studios, will win over the masses. If we break it down into its most simple form, V Rising is a top-down vampire-themed PvEvP survival game. You play as a vampire looking to claim the mantle of New Dracula. Now you might be wondering, what happened to the old Dracula? Well, he was killed and his death caused 7 days and nights of blood to rain down on the land of Verderon, infecting every living creature, human or otherwise. Your job is to gather, pillage, craft, and kill your way to the top, taking out NPCs and players alike until you, and your clan if you decide to join one, become top of the food chain. There's your elevator pitch, and I'll be honest, just that concept alone won me and Livid over. But after really diving into the specifics of the game and speaking with the team ahead of early access launch, we were even more intrigued with what the team has been working on behind the scenes. Survival games have been hit or miss when it comes to establishing a memorable world. On one hand, you have Rust, a great game, sure, but in terms of world building, it's kind of a joke. On the other hand, you have a game like Subnautica, which truly innovated the survival genre, introducing players to a whole new level of playing survival games. From everything we know about V Rising, it's pretty clear the developers are pushing hard to make Verderon, the fictional world the game is set in, a memorable place that players want to explore. The idea is simple: model Verderon after the vampires themselves, cruel and dangerous, yet enticingly beautiful at the same time. As we put together this video ahead of early access launch, we know of 5 zones within the world. Farbane Woods is the southernmost region of the map and the starting zone for all players. The woods are an untamed wilderness of towering trees and ruins, overgrown from centuries of neglect. It's the perfect hideout for bandits and beasts alike, and because of the primitive nature of the creatures living in the woods, it's the perfect place for you to get your first kills and begin your progression within the game. Dunley Farmland was once the crown jewel of Dracula's empire, but has since crumbled to dust, taken over by simple farmers and ambitious aristocrats. Here, humble farmers tend fields and grow crops, providing the perfect defenseless buffer between the dark remnants that lurk just at the edge of the foggy unknown. While the farmers of Dunley are largely helpless, often preyed on by the creatures of the night, the local militia and the corrupt Church of Luminance are far from powerless and control these lands with power and purpose. If players manage to make it out of Farbane Woods, the Dunley farmlands will prove to be the next challenge on their quest for vampiric ascension. A point worth mentioning, there's nothing barring you from moving to any zone within the world, but as you explore further away from the starting zone, expect the challenges to ramp up significantly. Now, little is known about the next zone, the Cursed Forest, located furthest northeast. Once as vibrant as Farbane Woods, the Cursed Forest is now home to tortured spirits, half-living corpses, infected wildlife, and even witches, twisted by the darkness that engulfs the region. Players can expect to find a right proper challenge in this area, but if video games have taught us anything in the last 30-ish years, it's that high risk often means high reward. Now, far to the west is the seat of human power in the Silverlight Hills, home of the port city Brighthaven, and the true home of the Church of Luminance. The leaves, grass, and even the fauna are all bathed in the color of a vivid sunset. Silverlight Hills is where the first humans landed in Verderon, an area rich in mineral resources, including veins of silver ore, a material so pure it's toxic to vampires. Although opulent, Silverlight Hills is filled with both wealth as well as desperation. Both rich and poor occupy the city, and while the most wealthy live in tall buildings towering over the city, the slums are filled with those who are just struggling to survive. Outside of Brighthaven, on the highest hills, sits the Fortress of Light, a sacred site guarded by the church's greatest champion, Solaris. Don't expect that to be an easy fight. We also know of one additional zone, the Hollowed Mountains, but little has been revealed about this location. It is connected to Farbane Woods, which could indicate a zone players will be able to explore early on, but the small size leads me to believe this is going to be tied into some sort of endgame system. We'll just have to wait and see. The 5 zones make up the continent of Vardaran, but of course, with any early access game, the developers are leaving themselves room to expand. I should also point out that as of July 2021, the developers stated that the world was more than 4.5 square kilometers or 1.7 square miles, not small by any stretch. Now, to connect these different regions, the team is actually using a road system, and while that doesn't sound that exciting, it's actually pretty neat. Roads will have unique properties that will dictate some level of gameplay. NPCs will actually use the roads to move around the world, and if the wrong groups run into each other, it could lead to a fight, one completely independent of player interaction. Now, that's the beauty of the system. Players are just another layer to how roads work in V Rising. You could stumble across a skirmish at the perfect time, picking off any stragglers and reaping the benefits of the bloodbath. You could also run across bosses that also use the road network. The possibilities are wide open at the moment, and until we go hands-on, it's pretty exciting to speculate about how far the devs could take this system. To make things even more interesting, we have to pivot back to our vampire and our means of transportation. V Rising features a traditional mount system, and this is all about function over form. Mounts will allow players to move across the world and have the added value of storage for players' loot, but there is a twist. Mounts will all spawn with randomized qualities in the world, offering differences in movement speed, rotation, and acceleration. This is going to be a factor in both PvE and PvP, which means investing in that perfect horse is all the more important. How we obtain horses, well, that's not entirely clear, but we definitely need them if we plan to conquer Verderan. If you're worried that running around the world might be a bit slow, well, there may be a faster method. We don't know much, but some teases from the developers lead me to believe we'll be able to transform into bats and quickly navigate the world in some capacity. How exactly this works and what systems and resources tie into it, well, that's not clear quite yet. Because V Rising is a survival game, we didn't want to isolate every little thing into its own section. It's important to talk about the core gameplay experience, as this is easily the most important thing we can discuss, because it's going to inform you, the potential player, if the game is worth checking out. However, there are a few unique systems we did want to highlight. You're no doubt familiar with the idea of a day-night cycle. Hundreds, if not thousands of games utilize this feature, but in V Rising, the time of day has some serious gameplay implications. First up, some basics. And before you ask, I got confirmation of these details directly from the developers. A full day is 1,080 seconds, so 45 seconds an hour on standard settings. Now, nighttime is twice as long as daytime, so 6 minutes of daytime and 12 minutes of nighttime. If you have a private server, you can mess with these settings and have longer days or longer nights, as well as change the ratio of daytime and nighttime from anywhere between Swedish summer and Swedish winter. Now, one aspect of being a vampire is that direct exposure to the sunlight will cause you harm. That means any attempt to raid or pillage in broad daylight is going to be that much more challenging. If you're skilled, you can use the dynamically created shadows, but this is only temporary cover. Through an in-game system, you can increase sunlight resistance, which allows you to soak up more daylight before catching on fire. Where things really start to get interesting are at night, where you, as the player, have a clear advantage over the NPCs that roam the world. Humans won't be able to spot you as easily in the dark, which allows for easier hunting. I should also point out that there are specific creatures that only wander the world at specific times of the day, which may be important as you track and obtain rare abilities or important resources. Now, of course, this all ties right into the game's combat, and it's important I remind you all that Stunlock Studios, the team developing V Rising, is also responsible for Battlerite, a team-based action arena combat game that Livid was a huge fan of. A hallmark of that game was its incredibly snappy combat and controls, and it's a fair bet that the team is going to take their near-perfect combat from Battlerite and pipe it directly into V Rising. Of course, we are talking about a completely different game, so there are going to be some changes, but WASD movement and the ability to trigger and aim abilities with the flick of a wrist and the tap of a key will no doubt be present. Confirmed by the developers, players will start with one basic attack, your claws, a movement ability, Veil of Blood, that gives you an iframe, a little movement, and a momentary shadow double that fools PvE mobs until you break the pseudo-stealth, Shadow Bolt, a basic magic projectile, and Bloodrite, a channeled counter that blocks damage and causes an explosive knockback when hit. Because this is a survival game with PvP elements, the team wanted to make sure that readability was a big part of the combat experience. The ability to identify another player's moves is crucial, which is why nearly every attack in the game is vivid and often over-exaggerated. New abilities are gained through weapons and spells. Weapons can be swapped between freely during combat, and spells are locked during combat. Weapons unlock more abilities as you get higher tiers of them, but eventually you'll have a basic attack and 2 other unique abilities on each weapon on the Q and E. These abilities share a cooldown on all weapons, so if you use your Q on a spear and switch to a sword, you can't use that sword's Q, but you can still use the sword's basic attack and E. Spells are gained through killing and devouring V-Blood units, basically the bosses and mini-bosses of the open world. You can have 2 different spells and 1 ultimate ability slotted at any time. Abilities are tied to cooldowns, though the team has experimented with mana and other resources in the past, which means they're not entirely off the table as we move through early access. At its core, combat is a means to an end, a way to kill enemies, collect resources, and gain power, but there are other systems that feed directly into the combat that are important to point out. The first is blood. All vampires need blood to survive, which players can obtain by attacking humans, finishing them off with a swift bite. Different enemies have different blood types which grant the player certain perks. Warrior blood improves physical damage, rogue blood improves movement speed, scholar blood improves magic damage, and worker blood is the safest bet to use while gathering resources. On top of that, the individual humans have higher or lower qualities of blood, so hypothetically, you could have blood buffs of the same type, but one could provide significantly more benefits. This is just a snapshot of how the perk-like system within the game is going to work, and when I asked the developers for some clarity, they said things are much more complicated, but we'll have to wait and see how that all plays out. Blood is one of the key survival resources you'll need to actively manage, because if you let your blood stores fall too low, it'll cause ill effects, and eventually, your death if allowed to fall too low. Now, during the intro, we mentioned the death of Dracula, the torrent of blood that rained from the sky following his death. This actually ties into another blood-related system, V-Blood. That blood rain infected everything, man and beast alike, and as such has imbued incredible powers into NPCs across the continent. V-Blood is a cornerstone of the V-Rising experience and essential for your ascension as a vampire. Defeating enemies that are imbued with V-Blood will unlock that particular blood memory, which is a sort of DNA from past abilities and knowledge that you can leverage as a vampire. When you kill and then feed on a V-Blood unit, you instantly unlock an ability or 2, as well as some kind of recipe. It could be a new way to use a crafting station, the crafting station itself, certain castle structures, etc. This is a parallel system to other progression within the game, such as research desks and studies. At these, you can either use various tiers of paper to unlock random research, or you can find books within the world, often dropped by enemies or found in chests. Now, in order to track V-Blood units, you'll need to build a blood altar, a workstation that allows players to set goals and focus in on specific targets that might help them accomplish those goals. The altar provides you with some basic level intel, but doesn't inform the player when or how they should approach a specific target, and as you might expect, being infused with V-Blood makes you an apex predator and challenging obstacle to overcome. Hunting V-Blood units really depends on the player. A hunt can be relatively quick, or they can be in the depths of a stronghold that takes a long time to cut through. V-Blood units are a clear step above their common counterparts, having unique UI indicators like different colored names and unique designs to indicate to players that they're special. What would a survival game be without the crafting, building, and of course overall progression? These things are woven into the very fabric of the genre, and the V-Rising team is really trying to step outside the box to make that experience more enjoyable for the player. First up, your castle. We don't have time for shacks and bungalows. A real vampire needs a real base of operations. Players will be able to create a castle or multiple castles if they so choose, pretty much anywhere in the world, barring a few unique locations. At the heart of each castle is the blood well, which players can transfer blood into to power the entire base. This includes fortifying the walls, activating the crafting stations, and ultimately providing you with a safe haven from your enemies. Now, there is a kicker to the blood well. If not kept stocked up with blood, the castle will begin to decay. Crafting stations won't function, walls will begin to crumble, and breaching the stronghold will be that much easier. This is all by design. Players that keep their castles well stocked can create a true foothold on the map, but if someone builds a small base and then decides to stop playing the game, well, now there's a vehicle to clear that castle off the board and give other players a way to score some quick resources. It's a really interesting system that I hope plays out the way I think it will, because while making a Gothic castle sounds awesome, you have to think about the longevity of the game and how all of those pieces tie together in a multiplayer online universe. One of my absolute favorite things about the castle is players' ability to capture and enslave thralls, servants that players twist and convert to their will. The variety and power of the thralls you create will allow them to collect different materials for your team. Workers will be better at collecting mining materials and wood. Soldiers will be better at delving into population centers to grab human refined supplies like cloth, or even into graveyards for rare undead materials. They'll also live at your base when not out on a job and are hostile to unfriendly vampires, so choose carefully which servants you want to enslave to defend your home. The idea of capturing warriors, craftsmen, and anyone you run across in the world has a certain appeal to it, and if those things tie into gameplay systems in a meaningful way, it could prove to be one of the most influential systems within V Rising. Castles are really at the center of your progression as a player. Crafting also comes into the picture here, and from what we've seen, these automatic crafting stations will keep your vampire empire moving forward. According to the devs, there is a nice variety of crafting stations that players will have access to. There are basic crafting stations, like your workbench and tailoring station to produce weapons and armor, refining stations like looms and lumber mills, specialty stations like alchemy and jewel crafting for potions and magical foci, and production stations like tombs and vermin nests to provide you with things like rats and skeletons to farm the less appealing materials. As long as the Bloodwell is powered, so too will your crafting stations, but this begs the question, what exactly will these stations be pumping out? As far as we know, this is where our raiding, pillaging, and even cooperating comes into play. The idea is to recover forgotten knowledge from the bloodlines of the land, gleaning new recipes from NPCs and players alike. As a quality of life thing, we also know there's a catch-up mechanic that allows groups of players to have access to crafting recipes based on the furthest progressed member in a group, meaning newer players are on a more even footing with veterans. There's still so much shrouded in mystery when it comes to your progression as a player, how you gain power, obtain new weapons, upgrade those weapons, even unlock new skills, but it'll all be tied into this idea of killing anyone or anything that gets in your way of your pursuit of knowledge. We've taken quite an extensive look at the game, and I wanted to end by talking about some important early access details. The team has revealed that official and private servers will be available at launch on May 17th. That means if you want to purchase or host your own servers, you'll be able to do that. Official servers will run with around 40 concurrent players in the following varieties: PvE with support for 4-player clans, PvP with support for 4-player clans. In this mode, you don't drop bloodbound items on death like weapons and non-cosmetic armor. PvP Solo, which is the same as PvP I just mentioned without clans. PvP Duo, which is the same PvP again, but clans can only be 2 members. And PvP Merciless, which supports 4-player clans and is pretty much the hardcore variant of the game. You drop everything upon death, including all equipment, and your castle heart is vulnerable to capture and total destruction. Official servers will have support in North America, Europe, Brazil, South Africa, Japan, Taiwan, and Australia. If you're on a private server, you will have some more options in terms of how you want the game to operate, but the devs say you shouldn't exceed 40 players max, which is the benchmark for perfect optimization. In terms of playing alone or with a group, you can form small clans of up to 4 players, but no more. The devs have said you can expand clans on private servers, but are happy with the smaller team size on official servers. The idea is to make V Rising a small group game that really focuses on the moment-to-moment gameplay and cohesion of a tight team. It's an exciting change, one that I'm personally excited to see play out. We're used to massive Zergs dominating PvP-based survival games, and V Rising looks to take a much different approach. At the end of the day, the Stunlock team wants players to experience V Rising however they want. Some might choose to lean into PvE, others PvP, but they're trying to create avenues for all types of players. And the best news of all, V Rising drops into early access very soon, on May 17th for Steam and the Epic Games Store, and you can pick it up for around $20. While V Rising might not have the AAA attention of, say, Elden Ring, we can easily see this being one of the biggest breakout hits of 2022. The team behind the game is smart, hungry, and the concepts presented in V Rising are intriguing. I, for one, will be diving in on day one with Livid, so if you're interested in checking out the game, I strongly encourage you to join us on Discord. We've got a great community of over 20,000 members with a special section dedicated just for V Rising, so check out the link below and join today. If you are playing the game and want more V Rising content in your feeds, do me a solid and hit that thumbs up and consider subscribing. As always, we'll be coming at you with our best series worth your time and wish I knew sooner, so don't miss out when a new video drops. Of course, if you like this series and everything we're doing here on the channel and you want to support us even more, consider becoming a member. For just $1 or $2, you're helping Livid and I achieve our dreams of becoming full-time content creators. Check out the join button below to learn more. My name is Kodiak, and from everyone here at Legacy Gaming, thanks for watching, and play on.